Okay. Hey guys, I'm Jacob,
I'm Noah.
I'm Cassidy.
I'm Eric.
I'm Emma.
and today we're going to be discussing the origin stories of characters from Guardians of the Galaxy, similar to how we discussed Black Panther at the beginning of class. We think these characters we chose can provide a unique insight into what an origin story is, because they all have unique backgrounds distinct from Black Panther's more serious and grounded tone. Their rough beginnings and eventual transition into heroes can allow us to understand that perhaps an origin story is created and not assigned to us. We will discuss themes of identity, difference, redemption, power, and purpose. Perhaps our beginnings can be chosen, and our origin can be when we begin to fulfill our purpose, not where we came from.
Yeah, so jumping off that, we're just going to jump right into our first character, which is Star-Lord or Peter Quill. So just kind of going back to starting in his early life and kind of beginning of his origin story. He was born in Missouri, and when his mom died of cancer, tragically, he was abducted by an alien scavenger named Yondu, and then he was taken and raised by the scavengers and kind of grew up as a scavenger and a mercenary. And then what we find out later in the movie was that he was actually supposed to be delivered to his dad, who he never knew. So this kind of relates to the whole 1619 podcast and kind of the theme of unknown origin, because Star-Lord or Peter Quill never knew who his dad was and had that kind of stripped from him, similarly to how we saw slaves kind of being when they were transported across. They were kind of stripped from all of their origin stories back in Africa, and they were never told of them. So basically, after that, we see the event of the movie start to take place when Peter Quill, or Star-Lord, as he goes by in the movie, and just to touch on the name Star-Lord real quick, we also kind of wanted to relate that back to Nakashima's A Rose by Any Other Name, because he chooses to kind of separate his identity between Peter Quill, this little kid that was abducted on Earth when his mother died, and then Star-Lord, his new kind of superhero persona. So in the origin of in the movie, we see him try and steal the Infinity Stone for Yondu, but he eventually turns on Yondu and is eventually captured and put in jail for stealing the Infinity Stone, where he ends up meeting the Guardians of the Galaxy. So then towards the end of the movie, when Ronan the Accuser, the main villain of the story, gets the Infinity Stone, we see the Guardians of the Galaxy have to come together to try and stop him from destroying a planet. And basically how they do that is they all wield the Infinity Stone together. And we thought this kind of was a great impersonation of the themes of both power and difference, showing that how these people coming together to all like wield the Infinity Stone and the power shows how they all came together and set aside their differences for this greater good of trying to save the planet. So another big thing that is prevalent in the movie is the music throughout the entire movie. It actually got a lot of praise for the great musical score. And that was because that came from Peter Quill's origin story. When his mom died, she left him a mixtape of all these great songs that he listens to, and those are the songs that we hear also throughout the movie. So just to kind of further relate Star-Lord back to our themes, the theme of like trauma and redemption, his trauma was obviously his mother dying in the beginning, which kind of led him down this path of the scavenger and the Ravager life and a lot of these negative qualities. But as soon as he meets the Guardians of the Galaxy and kind of has this switch, he turns his story into a redemption story when he joins the Guardians of the Galaxy and starts helping people rather than stealing from people. And this is kind of him finding his purpose in life.
Yeah, it's really fun to see like his connection to Earth with his mom and like the little cassette tapes and like how it contributes to his own personality because he's so goofy and everything.
Yeah, I think the music that his mom gave him, he holds on to that. I don't know how he got the batteries for his little Walkman thing in space, but he holds on to that and he builds like part of himself, his tastes and all that, from something that was very important to him. So, he just carries that over into his adult life. So it's a very important part of his origin, I think.
Yeah, so similarly to how Peter Quill likes to go by Star-Lord, Drax, actually, he's called Drax the Destroyer, which connects to A Rose by Any Other Name by Nakashima that we read, because Drax the Destroyer is a pretty serious name, and it kind of plays into his identity and how his one purpose in life is to kill Thanos and to kill Ronan and to destroy everybody in his path, to be able to complete that. The reason why he wants to kill Ronan and Thanos is because Ronan and Thanos went to his home planet and killed his family. So he's been fueled by revenge and anger to, I guess, avenge his family and get back at Thanos and Ronan by killing them and all of their minions and posse. Um, he becomes blinded by this revenge shown in the movie because whenever the Guardians are going to the planet to sell the Infinity Stone, he calls Ronan to the planet and actually almost gets himself killed and a few of the other Guardians killed. And he is also kind of the reason why the Infinity Stone gets in Ronan's hands to begin with. You see this transition whenever Groot pulls him out of the goo on the planet. It's kind of like a rebirth to where he realizes that family is important, and these friends that he is creating, they can work together and become like the Guardians of the Galaxy and work together for good instead of just having one straight focus of killing Thanos and Ronan. He realized that he can use his destroying power to do good and to help other people instead of just trying to kill Ronan.
And I made this point earlier and everyone laughed at me, but I'm gonna say it again because I think it's kind of funny. But I think that like goo moment where it comes out is like it's like a baptism for him. It's like a new beginning, and you know, that's just what I think. You can disagree.
Very insightful, Jacob.
Mhm.
So kind of similar to Drax is Groot and Rocket. They all kind of had the wrong outlook on life before they came together and met each other. Groot, we don't know very much about his background. We know that he's a tree, and Rocket, we know, is genetically modified by people to become like a killing machine. So that kind of plays into his origin story because he really doesn't know his past, and all that he knows is that people were trying to make him better and make him less like himself. And that also plays into his personality, where he is mean and he is sarcastic and he doesn't like to show very much emotion because he's never really had emotion shown to himself. You see this transition whenever he forms a relationship with Groot and they kind of grow together to be like friends. And it especially is shown whenever Groot decides to encase all of the other Guardians to save their lives in spite of his own. So whenever Groot shows emotion in that, whenever Rocket shows emotion in that part, you see that he's kind of transitioning as a character from being heartless and cruel and mean into more of a caring and responsible character.
And I think he like, even though he doesn't portray his emotions, I feel like he does have, he suppresses them in a way that he doesn't even notice them. I remember there's this one scene, I don't remember what movie it's from, but he kind of touches on his feelings about who he is, saying, I think the quote was like you think I want to be this way, like I'm like part robot, part like this animal that I don't even know about. And I feel like he's just so confused as well.
I agree, and I feel like throughout the story he kind of like comes to terms with it, and he uses his like part robot, part animal thing for the better side of it. He uses his crazy smart tactics to help steal the Infinity Stone instead of stealing other things and selling it for a whole bunch of money.
Okay. On kind of a separate note, a little bit of a pivot, I'm going to talk about Gamora now. And so Gamora is part of a species or a culture called the Zeho. I have no idea if I said that right, but her planet and her culture was eviscerated by Thanos when he came by, and he wiped out half of all life on her planet because that's kind of his prerogative. And actually, Thanos took an interest in Gamora because she, even though she was a little kid when this happened, she kind of like fought back and tried to protect her family, and so he took out her family, but he adopted Gamora and she became an assassin on his behalf. And so what you see there is Thanos kind of like taking this trauma that he's inflicted upon her and like using it against her and, channeling it in a way for his own means. So there's a bit of like Stockholm syndrome kind of stuff going on there, which is kind of gross. But her initial origin story reminds me of the colonization and the genocide of, indigenous and native people, where these colonizers would come in and they do horrible things. They commit all these atrocities because they have these really twisted ideologies about the betterment of society. So that kind of relates back to the Conquerors reading that we did. And even though Gamora ended up being Thanos's favorite daughter, Gamora still kind of resented Thanos, and she eventually betrayed him, and she worked against him and Ronan, and that put her on the path into meeting and then becoming one of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And trying to track down one of the Infinity Stones, she stumbles across Peter Quill, and their first scene is this really great fight scene. But eventually, they come together and they form a romantic relationship. And then with the Guardians, in effect, she has this found family. But the really important relationship is with her and Peter. And the reason why they work in their relationship is because they have these vast differences, because she's such a stone cold, like she's an assassin, and she's been trained by Thanos not to have all these emotions. And then Peter Quill, whether he knows it or not, he's kind of a goofy, like he's a little arrogant. And so, their differences actually work and balance each other out. And that's something that I think is pretty interesting. And I think Gamora demonstrates that you can come back from these terrible things that happen early in your life. And she overcame this like indoctrination that Thanos had over her, and she found this like support group, and that guided her into becoming something better, I think.
Star-Lord's like a breath of fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
After
They're good foils for each other, I think.
Yeah, so like everybody has been talking about Thanos as he's a super big bad guy, which in fact he is. But I'm gonna stand up for Thanos and talk about why he is who he is. But an interesting thing is that Thanos was actually born into a very peaceful environment. He was originally a pacifist when he was going to school or when he was not mature. But later something happened in his life. His mother attempted to kill him because his mother was very disgusted by the way he looked, and which was stopped by his father. So this definitely has played an important role in altering Thanos's personal opinion toward the world and how he define and identify himself. And another thing that happened at the same time was that he fell in love with Mistress Death, who was the like resemblance of death and darkness. So those two things together, they have dragged Thanos out of his pacifist environment. So, and those two things together, they have distorted his character into and making him into the supervillain that we see he is on the screen. So I quote a line describing Thanos, that Thanos had become fascinated with nihilism and death. So we can see that Thanos was originally born into a peace-loving family, but then because of something that happened that's added to his identity, which is his mother trying to kill him and him falling in love with Mistress Death, and those two things together had made him a supervillain. And so after discussing his origin stories, we want to look at why has he become the supervillain. As we have discussed, it's about his identity, and we're gonna dive a little bit more deeper into that. So because as we have said, originally he was a pacifist, so to some extent he had some connections with Titans of the same, which are the same species as he is. But after his mother trying to kill him, he sort of lost his connection to the same species as he was, and together with falling in love with Mistress Death, he was just dragged away from his own identity with Titan, and he had become something else. But at the same time, he has acquired superpower, which made him the most powerful being in the universe. So himself losing the connection with his own species, with kindness, and at the same time gaining superpower, has made his own identity, which is that he is the strongest being in the universe, which is a superior being. And this identity of him somehow constitutes his own goal of trying to annihilate half of the universe's population. But an interesting thing is that he is not trying to annihilate half of the universe's population to his own good or something. He argued that he do this to maintain long run sustainability of the whole well-being of the universe. So he does not do it to control the universe, but rather to do something that's, in his opinion, kindness to the overall well-being of all residents of the universe. And the reason behind this, as we have discussed, is that he has lost his own connection to his Titan species, and probably he has lost empathy toward other beings in the universe as well. All he looked at was the universe was overly populated and the population needs to go down, which is extremely objective and cold-blooded, but he lacks some warmth and empathy toward other beings. So this somehow reminds me of Nazism, which their claim was somehow to some extent similar, because Nazism also advocated for race like annihilation, and which serves for the purpose of the well-being of the whole human being. So and I also find that it is possibly the lack of empathy toward other being and lack of understanding toward other races that had constituted Nazism to some extent. So, and finally, we're going to compare Thanos to other characters. And the first one I'm going to compare Thanos to is Groot and Rocket, because one interesting thing about Groot and Rocket is that Rocket and Groot, they're both genetically like engineered, so they are not born with a origin story. It is their job to find their own origin stories. So, and in the case of Groot and Rocket, they were just wandering the universe and robbing for money, for survival. So they were not doing anything purposeful, or they do not have a clear definition of what they have to do with their life. But later, after they meet the Guardians of the Galaxy, they establish their connections to the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they had sort of maintained this connection. And it was through this they found their mission, which was to protect the universe. So I think looking from this perspective, we can see how relationship and connection has played a role in defining a person's identity, which on the contrary, Thanos had an identity at first, but lost it after his mother attempted to kill him. And one final comparison is that I think Thanos and Ego, they're pretty similar. Thanos and Ego are both two supervillains, but a difference between them is that Thanos is trying to annihilate half of the population with a purpose, but Ego was just his goal was to take over the whole universe. But as I watched this, I was just wondering, if you take over the whole universe, what's it for, right? Everybody else would be dead and you're just alone. And so Egos has no common ground with other beings at all. While Thanos, despite his traumatic origin story, he still has a origin story. So I think that to some extent has made him decide that he should do something that's for the well-being of the whole universe, rather than Ego just trying to take over the universe.
Yeah, you went a little bit into the comic book origins, which is really cool, and then compared them with the movie origins. But whichever one you look at, he does have a lot of trauma that he overcomes in just a very unhealthy, negative way. And so you look at the Guardians have all this trauma as well, but they band together and they find like healthy ways to like overcome it or channel it. But Thanos, it's not like he doesn't come across people who could help him as well. He has his little family of like Nebula and Gamora and all that, but instead of opening up and having like empathy and warmth to them, he's very cold, and so he kind of loses his shot at having his own group to support him and all that. So trauma can be taken in a lot of different ways. And, with Thanos, it was taken much different than the rest of the Guardians, I think.
His family is also like super like artificial, you
Mhm.
know? Like even though he has all this trauma, it's different from all the rest of the Guardians because their trauma was inflicted by like another being, like destroying like whatever they loved. But Thanos, like his mother, I didn't know his mother tried to kill him. I did not know that. Like, what's the context with that?
It was
That
like
was
his. Okay.
you good.
Okay. Cool. So it was like his mother, found him like very disgusting looking or something, and found him that he had an ill will to like harm others, and then his mother tried to kill him, but her mother was stopped by his father.
That's so sad.
Yeah, that's also really interesting because Thanos kind of does the same thing with Nebula, where he doesn't really find her good enough. So he doesn't necessarily kill her, but he takes away a lot of the parts that make her her, and he changes them to make her better, and like different. So I feel like it's a really good point to bring up, Eric, because he kind of does the same thing without even realizing it, I'm sure.
Yeah, that goes to speak like how your childhood presents itself in your own actions later on. But this is a good transition to go to Nebula. But in order to like fully understand Nebula's story and ultimately why she's different, we have to think about the like all the different influences that have pivoted her life. So like from the very beginning, Nebula has been entwined with Thanos's own origin story, which we kind of touched on. And it's really important to understand his role because Thanos contextualizes Nebula's actions, I think a little bit more so than Gamora, because Gamora has her own kind of individualistic, like, um, being about her. But Nebula is a Lufomoid. It's like a humanoid alien, and it's characterized by her like blue and purple skin. Um, but like it's interesting to see because she doesn't really identify herself as one. She like I had to go online and search up like Lufomoid because she's never said, "Oh, I'm I'm a humanoid alien." She's always referred to herself as like Thanos's daughter, like a thing that Thanos owns, or like galaxy class killer because that's what Thanos made her to be. Um, but later on in her character arc, she considers herself as Gamora's character or Gamora's sister, which is like a turning point in like how she identifies herself and the connections that she makes. Um, However, when we first meet Nebula, she's the right-hand woman of Ronan, the accuser, and basically she's a periphery being, but we put more significance into her, besides the fact that she's just like a side villain or like a henchwoman. But Thanos, in like some context, some background, Thanos invaded her planet just like Drax, just like Gamora, but and like killed half of her population, like how his like own philosophy like told him to do so. And she's characterized as this like assassin that has so much pain and anger, and that actually stems from Thanos's own trauma from when his entire race is now like extinct. But unlike Thanos, Nebula's trauma doesn't come from like a specific event. It isn't from her childhood of being taken away because she's never mentioned it. So I guess that suggests that she doesn't remember it either. Um, but like but her trauma comes from her relationship with Thanos, her adopted father. So the few times that Nebula sheds any light about her feelings, whether it's like rage or pain, which we mostly see, she doesn't talk about her home. And as Cassie said, she's replaced with mechanical body parts to um, to better her abilities and train herself to endure more pain because Thanos knows that like his own shortcomings and not being able to like handle such pain. He wants Nebula to go through that. Um, and the only constant in her life has been her attempts to meet Thanos' expectations and competing with Gamora for his approval. So her origin story isn't a heritage or stems from a place. It's the feelings and experiences that occur with Thanos and Gamora. And interestingly, although Nebula and Gamora have similar backgrounds where their planets are both overtaken by Thanos, Nebula doesn't join the Guardians of the Galaxy until much later and after Gamora does. And this is because she's not only fighting against um, one of the biggest villains in the Marvel Universe, like by herself, but she's battling herself between this old Nebula that's really angry and like hurt all the time and just trying to accept like being connected to Gamora and finally contextualizing her feelings into words. Um, that's the new Nebula. So between getting revenge on her father and finally having someone to rely on, Gamora, which is Gamora, she struggles to connect with this new self, and that kind of draws to the themes of trauma and redemption. She's trying to overcome this trauma, just like all the other Guardians of the Galaxy, really, and like redeeming herself in a way that's not that like her temptation of just killing Thanos, because constant like there are multiple times in the movies where she's like, I'm just gonna kill Thanos. Like this is how everything's gonna be fixed. But in Endgame, like he's finally dead, but she's not like satisfied or happy or anything. She's just like um she's just empty. But she finally has this like family with like the Avengers and like the Guardians of the Galaxy. And like it's really interesting to see. But
Yeah, and I feel like she also has a connection kind of to Rocket because they're both modified to become better than they really are, and that stems to their dangerous side and killing and doing everything for the wrong reason. I think that Rocket kind of just like foreshadows a little bit about what's going to happen to Nebula and how he was able to have like the family with the Guardians, and then later on in the later movies Nebula kind of does the same thing and leaves her anger and stuff behind to join the Guardians to protect the galaxy.
Yeah, it's just like a very classic tale of all these people in the Guardians of the Galaxy basically overcoming their differences and their past trauma to basically redeem themselves and find their purpose and power. So, like again, that's kind of was the main reason we chose them for this project, and because it related very well back to the themes of the class about like power and purpose. Because we see that they have this trauma and they can all overcome this and unite together. And when they find themselves, they kind of find this purpose, and in this purpose, when you find the people you like love to be with, you really find power in that, which is kind of what unites them all and brings them together and gives them the power to go out and be the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, what I thought about a lot was when we were talking about choosing your origin story or not, because I feel like most of these characters have like two origin stories. They have like their traumatic background that puts them on a trajectory to probably not do some great things, but then they have another origin story later where they find these people and kind of turn it around. So I feel like if you ask them like what's your origin story, it'd be interesting to see like do they choose to talk about their early moments of trauma or the ones that put them on the path to doing a lot better.
I mean, in like informing Guardians of the Galaxy, that's kind of like a new origin story, for that not just like individual origin stories, but the collective origin story of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you guys for listening. We hope that you go get your tickets for Guardians of the Galaxy 3. We'll see you guys later.
Bye.